Hi everyone, this is Ethan versus Jacob, played on the 20th of October 2018. Ethan was white, let's get into this. E4, E6, D3. Okay, so probably a King's Indian attack of some sort. D5, Queen E2. I think this is a book line. It is actually book. Queen E2. It's an interesting idea. I don't really know the opening, so I'm not going to comment too much on it. Knight F6, I might just keep the opening book, switching between the two just to see how long these guys played book for. C5. Okay, that's got a question mark next to it in the book. Looks okay to me. I don't know why it's got a question mark next to it. G3. Bishop E7. Yeah, these guys are still following book. Knight C6. Yeah, that's book. Castles. And now this is where book ends. Queen B6 by black. So let's actually look at this position. Queen B6. I'm not sure if the queen wants to actually sit there. I mean, it looks like a decent spot, attacking B2 and putting it on this diagonal, stopping this bishop from developing. The reason I'm not too sure about this is because in these sorts of closed Sicilian positions, this King's Indian attack is kind of a closed Sicilian. Usually black is trying to advance on the queen side with his pawns, and the queen might actually be in the way of this pawn, of these pawns charging up the board and going on the attack. So I don't think Queen B6 is the way to do it. Is B5 a move? Is that horribly terrible? I mean, it looks okay to me. And the queen staying on D8 keeps D5 defended as well for a bit of time. Something like B5 is what I'd be looking at. If you're going to play Queen B6, have it behind the pawn, and that way you can charge these pawns up like crazy, or go for C4 or something like that. So I think Queen B6 runs counter to black's plan. I mean, it's not a bad move. You're not going to lose the game because of it. So it's not terrible. It's just me nitpicking, basically. Let's have a look. Rook E1. Rook E1. I don't know about Rook E1 either. I mean, the idea is to try and trade here and then control the E-file. But if you're going to put your rook on E1, maybe trade first. Not that I like trading. I don't think giving away the center like that is a good idea. But I don't think the rook wants to be on E1. I think there's a very good chance black will pass white by and play D4, and closing the center off. And when that happens, the rook wants to stay on F1, so you can go F4, F5, and march this F pawn straight down your opponent's throat. So I think Rook E1 is an inaccuracy. I think it's putting a rook on a square it doesn't want to be on. But white still has some decisions to make regarding this queen side. Maybe a move like C3 is the way to play. And the queen defends B2 because the C pawn's out of the way, and that actually lets the bishop charge out and roam maybe to E3 or G5 or something like that. Okay, so Rook E1. So both players, I think, have put pieces on squares they don't want to be on. D4, so now the center's closed. The rook is now looking pretty silly on this square. It's not going anywhere. It really wants to be back on F1, if anything. Okay, however, the problem with playing this move D4, it has actually opened up the C4 square. So this knight can make its way to C4. Before doing so, though, a move like A4 should be played, because you don't want your opponent moving their queen and then playing B5 to kick the knight out. Knight BD2 is played straight away. I think that's good, because you're going to be able to play knight here and A4, and you don't give black the time to play B5. So now E5 was played. That closes the center off completely, making this rook really, really silly on this square. But this queen's also quite silly on this square. This pawn wants to charge up the board. So rook F1. I mean, credit to white. He noticed his rook was silly, and he's gone and put it on a much better square. Now the knight can get out of the way, which would allow the F pawn to charge up the board and maybe swap, creating a half-open F file, or maybe push past and having a general pawn storm up the board like this. Okay, I'm not sure if playing it straight away is good. I mean, Knight c4 looks pretty good to me. You know, the queen moves and then you go a4 and you cement the knight in c4 this way. That move stops b5. And notice that if a6 is played, you can answer with a5 and the knight has now got this b6 square. And of course, b5 is a mistake because it just takes en passant. This is a very common idea when these pawns get advanced like this with the hole in c4, is that you chuck the knight in c4 and you chuck a pawn up here to stop your opponent from ever chasing the knight out. And if they try, you can play a5. Now if black wants to get rid of the knight, he has to waste a lot of moves playing b6 to stop a5, then a6, and then defending b5 with enough pieces, and then finally playing b5. It takes a lot of time to kick this knight out of here. Okay, so rook f1, yeah, I think knight into c4 straight away was the way to play it. So h6 was played. I'm not sure why. I don't think this knight was going to g5. If anything, the knight's going back to e1 before playing f4. Going to g5 doesn't work because it just h6 gets played straight away and the knight has to retreat. So h6, I'm not sure why it's played. Often this move is played to keep pieces out of here. The only reason I can think that maybe it was played is that this bishop is eyeing the e6 square, and black did not want this knight coming to here and chopping off the bishop. So this is common in a lot of openings, but I don't think black should have played it. I think he should have gotten his queen out of the way, maybe with c7, with the idea of trying to play b5, you know, and c4. And if this knight were to jump to g5, then h6. And if the knight jumps back to e1, then you can play a move like this if you want to. You probably don't want to, though. But yeah, it's good that black understands the idea that this bishop is a very, you know, his most powerful minor piece, most likely his good bishop on a different color square to his center pawns, and he didn't want to give white the opportunity of trading it. So that's the reason behind h6. I think it's a bit inaccurate. I think getting these queenside pawns going forward first, but yeah, it's not a terrible move. You're not going to lose the game because of it. So knight c4, queen c7, and now white needs to play a4. Absolutely, a4 is the move. He didn't play it though. He played rook b1. I'm not even sure why rook b1 was played. I don't see any reason why this rook wants to be on b1 rather than a1. There's no plan associated with that move. It's just it looks like it's just a wasted move. No, definitely a4, and that knight sits here for a very long time. And then white can look to play either knight d2 or knight e1, and then go f4, and then put the knight back again, and then have an enormous amount of pressure on this e-pawn. So yeah, rook b1, I think is, yeah, I don't get the reason behind it. Okay, so b5 was played. That's good. Black pounced on the opportunity. White had that one chance to stop b5 and didn't take it, and black has done a very good job, gotten b5 in. The knight has to go back, and now black's got quite a nice looking attack on the, you know, quite a nice expansion going on this side of the board. He's gone bishop e6. Yeah, I can't really see much better than that. I mean, yeah, I mean, one idea is to play this knight to here, and the idea is to play something like c4. You know, the bishop might want to sit on a6 to support c4 and put it on the same line as the queen and this rook. And the idea is to play c4 at the right time and play knight here and jump it into c5, which puts enormous amount of pressure on the d3 pawn. This is kind of King's Indian sort of plans, except with colors reversed. But bishop e6, he's played h6, so he's continued with his plan of bishop e6. b3, and I think that helps black, to be honest. It creates all these giant dark squared weaknesses because all the pawns are now on white squares. And you know, he's trying to stop c4, but honestly, you can't stop it. You know, black's got 1, 2 pieces defending that square, and once he moves the knight, he'll have another 2 more defending the square, and then he can get his rook into play, and he'll have 5 pieces defending this pawn. There's no way on earth white is going to find a way to have 5 pieces guarding this square. This is just creating weaknesses and just wasting a move that should be spent getting the knight out of the way so the pawn can charge up the board, and he can start marching this pawn up the board, or start putting pressure on this e5 pawn. Now his knight's been kicked out of c4 though. The idea of pressurizing c4 is probably not a thing anymore, and he's better off going for some sort of f5, g4, g5 plan instead. So b3, knight d7. Yeah, that's, I mean, the idea is to play c4 and then jump the knight into c5. And this means that when f4 gets played in, he can answer it with f6, and the bishop can drop back along this diagonal. I'm really liking black's position here. Rook a1, okay, so yeah, the rook should never have been on b1 in the first place. And now it's just wasted a move dropping back. Now the one danger for black, the black has to worry about, is the move by a4 from white, because you can't answer it with a6 like you'd want to because of the pin. After pawn takes pawn, there'll be rook takes rook. So here, because a4 is the move being threatened, and black certainly doesn't want to play b4 because then he will never get his c4 break in. The whole queen side just gets blocked up, and his entire attack just stops him instantly. So here maybe black should castle so that the rooks are connected. That way he can answer a4 with a6. He didn't know. He played knight b4, and yeah, I mean it threatens the c2 pawn. White had a very interesting response to this though. He just played a3 and said, go ahead, take my pawn. That was really, really clever. If knight takes c2, rook a2, and the knight is trapped. It's just trapped. Can't go anywhere. Clever stuff. a3, which means the knight has to retreat, and that gives white the time now to play a4, and this is just this just destroys black's entire attack. Black can't push, obviously. His attack ends, and if he takes, you just take back with the rook. And this is now an isolated pawn. This is an outpost. This is an outpost. Whoops. And he can chuck his knight into here as well. He probably wouldn't bother, though. Everything's covered, and black's attack has come to a complete halt. So after a3, just knight back a4. But black did not play it. White did not play it. White played bishop b2. This bishop does not want to be on b2 because it's running straight into a brick wall. This bishop has no future on b2 at all. I think all white was trying to do was connect his rooks, but yeah, I mean, the logic is probably, oh, this pawn's on h6 and there's pawns here and here, so this bishop has no future along this diagonal either, so I better put it onto b2. But the bishop does actually have a future on this diagonal. Once f4, f5 gets played, that bishop is needed on c1 in order to support g5 with your big pawn storm. So the bishop does want to be here. It doesn't want to be here at all. It's going nowhere from here. Okay, so knight c6, bishop b2, knight a5. So black is continuing with this idea of getting c4 in. And it's very hard for white to stop this. White, yeah, I mean, white could play something like c3, but black can just take it, and then, whoops. Black just takes the pawn, and then white's left with a backward pawn on d3. So he played rook fc1. I'm not sure what the plan is here. I guess the plan is to play c3. And then after takes, the rook will be on the same file as the queen. Black's not got a problem though. Black just moves his queen, and white's position's terrible because of the backward d pawn. So I hope that's not his plan. c4, okay, so he doesn't even get to play his c3 move because c4 is, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces defending it, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces attacking it. So he's getting this thrust in straight away. It looks really good for black on the surface. I would have preferred it if black's king was developed first. White does have some sneaky tricks he can try, but it takes an engine to find them. So the move suggested by the engine is c3 here. And yeah, this is a bit uncomfortable for black now, because taking is no longer as great as it used to be, because this pawn is advanced. Well, the pawn was on c5. Taking was terrible, because this backward pawn is never moving up with two pawns stopping it. But with the pawn on c4, c3 is now good. It was bad, now it's good because of black's last move. Instead of c4, I think castle. I don't think you want to bust this open until you get the queen off the c file, so it's not on the same line as the rook. You get your king tucked away in the corner, so no monkey business on your king, and get a rook behind the c file, behind the c pawn. The thing about a thrust like this is there's no rush to play it. White isn't forcing you to play it. You can better position your pieces first. You can get your queen off the c file, rooks behind it, king safe, and then play it when you need to. I think this is just a rushed move. The idea is great. c4 is definitely the push that black should be going for, but the timing of it was not so good. Get your pieces in position first when playing a pawn thrust like this that you can play anytime you want. So white didn't find the sneaky tricks associated with c3, and instead played b takes c4, which should leave black with a very strong position. So b takes, d takes, oh yuck. Probably better to, you're threatening to lose a piece. You probably need to play c3 here. I think that has to be played. No choice. Everything else is just terrible, and this just leaves white with two isolated pawns that are both very vulnerable, one on a half open file, and at the end of it all, black's going to have a very powerful looking piece sitting on c4. So black decided to give up his bishop rather than giving up his knight. Well, the knight is going to be incredibly strong, particularly in combination with this bishop here hitting a3, so I can understand this decision. I can understand it. I still think taking with the knight's better, and the position's opening up. The two bishops are going to become more and more powerful as the game goes on. So I think I prefer this one. And after takes, bishop takes, I'm really liking black's position. Black's now got this d3 push in when he wants to at the right time. And this queen, you get it with tempo. The queen's on pre. Black can just castle and get his rooks onto the c file, and white's in a lot of trouble. I think bishop takes c4 is not as strong. It still looks strong, but it's just not as strong. After knight takes, what can we do here? The bishop's on pre. It needs to be defended. The pawn's on pre. Maybe rook cb1. Maybe bring this rook over here to defend the bishop. And then the bishop can look to drop to c1 and maybe come out on the diagonal it's supposed to be. It's very, very strong for black, this position. White's going to have some difficult choices. And rook a2 is not the way to play. That just loses a ton of material to a attraction. Knight takes, bishop, rook takes, and then bishop skewers the two rooks. That's exactly what black did. Well done, Jacob. You spotted that nicely. Yeah, rook a2 just failed tactically. Rook here has to be the move. And white's under quite a bit of pressure here, but he can still fight this out. You know, maybe the knight can jump to d2 and shoo this knight away. The bishop can be rerouted to f1 and out to the queen side. Once the bishop gets into d3, he can set up a bit of a fortress. But yeah, what was played just loses. Bang, bang, bang. Well done. And then takes. And black has got a pawn and the exchange up. All he has to do is castle and start marching this a pawn up the board, and there's not much white can do about it. So white played bishop h3. Well, I mean, he was desperate to get the bishop onto some active diagonal, so that at least is an active diagonal. And you know, through the knight it guards the c8 square, which stops black from piling enormous pressure on this pawn. I still would have preferred the bishop coming to f1, or maybe the queen moving out of the way first, and trying to just set up a fortress by putting the bishop here. I know it's not a very nice bishop, but when you're losing like this, you've got to just go for the fortress, I think. Okay, let's see what happened. Bishop h3, rook fe8, queen jumps into a6, knight into b6. Is there a better way for him to play? I don't know. I just see this pawn on e4 that's undefended. I'm looking at moves like knight c5 hitting the queen and the pawn, and just simply knight f6 hitting the pawn looks really strong as well. Knight to b6. I think what white's trying to do is just stop black from getting some play down the b file and chucking a rook in b7. But I think, oops, where are we going? I think knight c5 is really, looks really good to me here. Knight c5 hits the queen, hits the pawn. It can get pinned, but I don't know. Maybe that pin is very annoying. It's hard to tell. Just rook on the b file, challenge this rook. Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of an unwritten principle in chess. When you're the exchange up and you've got two rooks and your opponent's got one rook, you try and trade them off, and that way your opponent no longer has a piece that moves like a rook anymore. So that sort of trade is the sort of thing I'd be looking for. Just try and get rid of the rook off the b file. Okay, let's see what happened in the game. Knight b6, bishop f1. Okay, the bishop's found the right diagonal. Rook e7. According to this, black had a very strong move here in queen c3, and that attacks the rook. And why can't the rook go to a2? Oh, because the knight's on pre. Yeah, that just, after rook here, the queen can just grab the pawn. So in this position, queen c3 with the queen fork forces the rook to here to save both pieces, and then he loses this pawn. So bishop f1, even though it's the right idea to get the bishop on that diagonal, it's actually a blunder. And instead a move stopping this, some sort of move stopping this. Maybe the prophylactic move. Prophylaxis in chess is when you play a move you want to play anyway, but you play it first to give you more options later. So after the queen comes here, the rook would have loved to have just gone here, keeping the pawn defended. However, it didn't have the time to do it later because the knight is on pre. So you play rook a2 first, and that way queen here is not a threat anymore. And the knight can just safely move away, and the rook is already sitting on its ideal square. So that's what I mean when I say the prophylactic move. Okay, so bishop f1 was a blunder. Luckily for white, black missed it and just played rook e7. Probably, I mean, psychologically, he wants to just play safe and not go for too much, because he knows that if he can slowly grind out a win safely in this position. Just slowly swap off the queen, swap off the rooks, and if they don't swap, start marching this pawn off the board. Whoops. So it makes sense for him to be playing like this. Bishop d3. Okay, the bishop's sitting there, sitting in its fortress position, and now white just has to somehow maneuver this knight over to the queen side and try and blockade this pawn and stop it from making progress. Let's see how that pans out. So you've got a rook a e8. I think the rook wants to be behind the pawn here. Is there any merit to a move like queen here, maybe? Or is that just bad? Queen takes, rook takes. Oh yeah, this pawn's on pre. Yeah, okay, so that's why he's done it. He's moved his rook over here to defend this. He didn't want to play pawn up because that creates massive light squared weaknesses around his king. So yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Rook a e8, that's good. Defend the pawn, and then the queen can come to here and shoo this queen away. It's sort of unfortunate this rook has to move, but what can you do? So now rook b3 was played. White's just kind of waiting to see what black does. It's kind of how he has to play, to be honest. Okay, so rook e6, rook e6. Why not queen b7? Is there a problem with this now? I guess, I mean, yeah. Shooing the queen out of there? I don't know. It's important to have a plan to try and get rid of this blockade. I guess rook here also gets rid of the blockade because you're threatening to move the knight somewhere, which shoots the queen away, which achieves the same goal of getting the pawn up the board. So now rook e6 is okay. Queen b5, knight d7. Okay, so the knight's heading over to here where it can trade off for the bishop. and then this pawn has clear sailing down the board. Yeah, fair enough. Queen c4, offering a swap off of queens, and yeah, take it. Well done. Yep. And the bishop's on pre, and the rook's on pre. Sorry, the bishop's attacking the rook, and that's why the rook is on pre. Rook 6 e7. I don't know. It looks a bit passive. I can see why he's doing it. The idea is to move the knight, and the rook defends both pawns. It's safety chess, so it's about getting rid of your opponent's counterplay. Yeah, I can't fault that. Bishop b5. Bishop b5. I mean, it kind of pins the knight to the rook, which forces the rook to move, but the rook wants to go here to pin the bishop to the rook. So it's kind of a tactic which forces a tactic that black wants. I don't know. Is there a better way for white to play this? Maybe. I mean, the whole point is the blockade. This pawn is what is black's win. If this pawn disappears, winning this game becomes very, very hard. So maybe just rook a3 is the way to do it. And the idea is, to maybe try and maneuver the knight over there as well, and set up a blockade. Knight there to there, and the bishop sitting here. It could be very hard for black to make any progress, especially if the king runs over and joins in with the defense. Bishop b5, I think, helps. Black didn't play rook b8 though. Black played f6. Okay, so the idea looks to be something along the lines of, if rook b8, the problem was bishop takes knight, rook takes, pawn takes, rook takes, and the knight grabs this. However, yeah, I mean, black should be happy with all those swap-offs. He loses the pawn, but there's no way on earth this knight can defend this. And it just happens that there's also a really cute little tactic here. You can just play d3 and just say, go ahead, take the rook. This pawn's not getting stopped. But even if that wasn't a possibility, even that wasn't a tactic, just simply rook here, grab the pawn, queen the a pawn is good enough. So I don't think black should have been worried about that, but black was, and played f6, trying to play it safe. But I think it's bordering on the point of playing too safe. Now this pin can be a bit annoying, and white might be able to get some play, especially if his knight can find its way into these holes here. Okay, so what was played here was, knight h4. So that's exactly what white did. Well done, Ethan. Yeah, get that knight into the holes, into those holes, and sort of try and punish black for playing a little bit too passively. So now king h7 was played. I'm not sure. I mean, he's trying to keep the knight out of g6. I don't think the knight coming to g6 was the problem. I think the knight coming to f5 was the major problem. So here, I mean, can you just play rook b8 anyway? Pin the bishop to the rook. I mean, that looks okay. There's no problem with the bishop taking the knight and then checking to get out of danger, because the rook is covering the checking square. I think rook b8 is the move to play. So like, if you're worried about the knight coming into g6, for instance, maybe now's the time to sack the material back. Maybe king f7. I mean, the problem with rook f7, of course, is you've got instant pin. Yeah, it is tricky. These holes, these light squared weaknesses, you put them together with a bishop and a knight, and yeah, defending is hard. I did mention black was playing a bit too passive. It's really showing. Black is going to have to sack the exchange back at some point. He just has to make sure he sacks it back in a way that still leaves him with a 1 position. So he played king h7, and the knight jumped into f5, and yeah, we've got a major problem here. The knight's on pre, the rook's the only thing defending it, and if the rook were to move here, suddenly bishop c4, and and it's looking pretty dicey. The rook comes down to here. Look at these pieces; they're extraordinary. The rook on the 7th rank combined with the bishop and the knight sitting in these holes. It's pretty hard to deal with it. And this pawn falls, and I think this is at least a draw. I think let's just say it's incredibly hard for black to win from this position now that the a pawn is gone. So in this position, black decided to just sack the rook black and play g6. Yeah, so, you know. So knight takes, rook takes, and then the rook went to a3, the knight went to c5, and black is only a pawn up now, and he's got knight versus bishop in the ending, which is past the half an hour mark. But this game is just too interesting. It's a good example of playing too passively, trying to play too safely as black. He had a winning position, but just sort of just went so safe that he let his opponent's pieces get into great positions. And he's, you know, that playing that f6 move early on really got him into a lot of trouble when he should have just been willing to sack this pawn to trade everything down to a one ending. Okay, so knight c6, knight c5. Here we go. f3, defending the pawn. King g7. This is a tough ending. Tough ending. The passed a pawn gives black the advantage, and the fact that he's a pawn up. But white can make this incredibly hard to win. Might even be a technical draw. The bishop should be able to outplay the knight. Rook a5, rook c7, king f2. The kings start heading over. Good play from both players, sending those kings over to where the important part of the board is. I just love seeing that. It means the endgame training has paid off. King d8, bishop d3, king c8. So should black trade here? If black trades the knight for the bishop, you end up with a rook ending, and rook endings are notoriously hard to win. Even a pawn up, a rook ending is very difficult to win. The reason I'm thinking that this might be an option is because after pawn takes, this rook traps the king off. But how does black actually make progress? I got this idea of the king coming around in here and then shepherding the pawn. Oops. And then shepherding the pawn forward with this rook cutting the king off the entire way. I can't help but feel this is a winning position for black. According to the engine, though, me making that exchange made the game dead drawn. So yeah, I guess what do I know, huh? It looks like a win for black, but okay, so let's actually follow the engine's analysis for a short while. Oh, because you're attacking this. Okay, so takes, king here. This rook is just a bit too active by the looks of it. The rook can get up to quite a bit of mischief. So let's just follow the engine's analysis for the time being. So what if the rook goes here to c6, defending all these pawns? What happens then? h4. You know, can't the king and the pawn just slowly... Oh, this pawn is en prise. Yeah, okay. Okay, there is a danger. Just taking the bishop was a bad idea. My first thought was that it was actually a good idea, but I guess I'm wrong. Takes. Yeah, the play. Like for example, after king c8, is rook a6 straight away good? Yeah, the rook is forced to come here to defend the pawn, which allows this king to get in front of this pawn. Yeah, that's actually obvious. Yeah, silly me. My analysis was not very good in this particular situation. Okay, so knight takes d3 is no good, but it should still be winning for white if he just leaves the knight on prise. There's probably there's no reason to swap this knight off because it's a bad bishop and the bishop can't really get active. Okay, king c8, h4, king b8. King b8. Why not king b7? What's wrong with that? Rook b5 check. Yeah, it's irritating, yeah. But I mean, why is king b8 better than king b7? I guess with the king on b8, the pawn is defended, and that frees up the rook, so the rook can go walk about and maybe do something. Okay, rook b5 was played check, and then the king went back to c8. And then g4 was played. So white's trying to create some sort of play over here. That allows a6, of course. Isn't this pawn here in a bit of danger to, you know, rook b6? This looks really strong. Like, what do you do? That's, maybe black just starts this pawn rolling and just starts giving up all these kingside pawns. But it looks pretty drawn to me in this situation. White might even be able to go on and win it. Oh no, I do not like a6 at all, giving up the b6 square for this rook. So one of the reasons all the way back here that king b8 didn't quite ring out, I really thought king b7 was the move. After rook b5, maybe the king can go to c6. But that does let the rook get in behind the pawn. So once this rook gets behind the pawns, there's a problem. Yeah, so actually making progress with black is very difficult here. Very, very difficult at all. Yeah, maybe the whole plan of sneaking the king underneath this rook was wrong. So very hard to tell. How does black handle this position? It's a tricky one. Okay, let's just get back to the game. This I could spend an hour on this position. It's a very instructive position. A lot can be learned from this position, but yeah, I don't really want to spend an hour on it. Let's go. Well, I don't have time in this video to spend an hour on it. Let's put it that way. I probably will spend an hour on it after the video. H4, king b8, rook b5, king c8, g4, a6. That allows rook b6, which unfortunately for white he didn't play. He threw his rook back to a5. He really needed to go active and go after these pawns and just rely on the fact that he'll be able to stop this pawn with something like bishop c4 and guarding a2, or maybe even sneaking his king underneath the pawn this way. So rook b6 was the winning move. Rook a5 was played, trying to set up a fortress. Unfortunately, that lets black make progress. King b7, and yeah, this is a problem. How does white play this? His rook can't get in behind the pawns anymore. He can't go after these kingside pawns. Now black is really making progress. White tried rook a3, but that just allows the king to march up with the pawn, and this is looking winning for black now. Pawn to c4 was tried. Black just ignored it. Didn't take on Passon, he just ignored it and played a5, king c2, rook a7. He put the rook behind the pawn. I don't think it's necessary. It's a tricky situation. It's all about finding the right setup for your pieces. Maybe the king wants to be on a6, so the rook can go to b7, and then the rook can infiltrate down to b4, which will allow the pawn to move up to a4. And once the pawn's on a4, then the rook can jump into b3 and chase this rook away. It's all about trying to find the way to get your pieces in. Once this pawn gets to a4, the king can go to a5 and then into b4. So it's all about finding a systematic way to smuggle your pieces deeper into the enemy position. So the move played was rook a7, putting it behind the pawn. That should also work, I think. I don't think it's as strong as trying to infiltrate down the b file, but I think it still should allow black to make progress with a4 and king eventually running in. And this bishop's kind of tied down here, stopping this connected pass pawn. So in this position, a rook takes a5 was not played. Let's delete remaining moves. After rook a7, the move suddenly stops. I'm guessing at this point both players had run out of time. Well, not run out of time, they were both below the 5-minute mark, so they stopped recording, which is a shame because I would absolutely love to see how this played out. All I can say is eventually black won, so I don't know whether that was due to some crazy time scramble blunder or if he managed to systematically get his king into the position and make progress. But very, very well played by both players. I think black could learn a lesson of being too passive when you're winning and just allowing your opponent's pieces to get into good positions. Creating all those holes on the king side was a big factor in that. He just wanted to safely defend his e-pawn, but that just made this bishop a monster and made the knight a monster as well. Okay, great game. I hope everyone learned something from that game. Two very strong players playing it out. White made the blunder early on, but then black played passively, and white very slowly clawed his way back into a very, very exciting ending. So great stuff. Well, I'm stopping it here. Goodbye.